The night everything fell apart began in a small house in the Lyra town. The rain outside was heavy, hitting the windows like tiny stones. Inside the living room, the air felt even heavier. Ebony Masigo stood quietly near the door, her hands shaking. In front of her, her mother, Mama Terasai, was shouting so loudly that the whole house seemed to tremble. "How could you do this to your own sister?" Mama Terasai yelled. On the couch, Lunara was crying loudly, her face buried in her hands. Tears kept falling as she pointed at Ebony. "My husband left me because of you," Lunara cried. "Kedrick said you were always messaging him and interfering in our marriage. My home is destroyed because of you." Ebony felt like the ground had disappeared under her feet. "What? That's not true," she said softly. "I never even spoke to Kedrick alone." But no one listened. Mama Terasai's face was full of anger. "Enough," she shouted. "Your sister's marriage is over because of you. I will not let you stay in this house another minute." Ebony's heart broke. "Mom, please listen to me." But Mama Terasai grabbed Ebony's small bag and threw it toward the door. "Get out of my house." Moments later, Ebony was standing outside in the cold rain. The door slammed behind her. She held her bag tightly as the rain soaked her clothes and tears mixed with the water on her face. That night she felt completely alone. But what Ebony didn't know was that somewhere, an email was already on its way to her inbox. An email that would soon change her entire life. A few months before that terrible night, Lunara's marriage was already slowly falling apart. But no one in the family knew the real reason. From the outside, everything looked normal. Lunara and her husband Kedrick often posted smiling photos together, and when they visited Nilira town, they acted like a happy couple. But behind closed doors, things were very different. Kedrick had started coming home late. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. He kept his phone locked and turned the screen away whenever Lunara walked near him. At first, Lunara tried to ignore it. She told herself she was overthinking. But deep inside, she knew something was wrong. The truth was that Kedrick had already started seeing another woman in secret. For months, he had been meeting her in restaurants and hotels in nearby cities. Instead of fixing his marriage, he was quietly planning his escape. Then one evening, everything exploded. The whole family had gathered for dinner at Lunara's house. Mama Terasai was there, Ebony was there, and Kedrick sat at the table looking unusually calm. The tension in the room was so thick that even small sounds felt loud. Suddenly Kedrick pushed his chair back and said coldly, "This marriage is over. I want a divorce." Everyone froze. Lunara looked at him in shock. "What are you talking about?" But Kedrick didn't look guilty at all. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward Ebony. "This didn't just happen," he said. "Your sister has been interfering in our marriage for months." Ebony blinked in confusion. "What?" Kedrick continued smoothly, like he had already practiced the lie many times. "She kept messaging me," he said. "She told me Lunara didn't respect me. She kept trying to turn me against my own wife." The room went silent. Ebony felt her heart drop. "That's not true," she said quickly. "I never sent you any messages like that." But Kedrick simply shrugged, acting tired and disappointed. "I have no reason to lie," he said. Lunara's face slowly changed from confusion to anger. Instead of questioning her husband, she turned toward Ebony with hurt and rage in her eyes. "You were jealous of me, weren't you?" Lunara said bitterly. "You couldn't stand seeing me happy." Ebony felt tears forming in her eyes. "That's not true," she said softly. "I've always supported you." And it was true. For years, Ebony had helped her sister with everything. Wedding planning, family problems, even money when Lunara was struggling. She had always been the quiet sister who stood behind everyone else. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Lunara needed someone to blame for her broken marriage. Accepting the truth, that her husband had betrayed her, was simply too painful. And the easiest person to blame was the one who never fought back. Ebony. The morning after she was thrown out, Ebony had nowhere to go. The rain from the night before had stopped, but the cold feeling in her chest was still there. She stood at the small bus station in Nilira town with the same bag she carried the night before. Inside it were only a few clothes, her phone, and the little money she had saved. There was no one to call, no one who would believe her. So she bought the cheapest bus ticket she could find and traveled to Kashora City. The city was loud, crowded, and unfamiliar. Tall buildings stood everywhere, and thousands of people walked past her like she didn't exist. Ebony had never felt so small in her life. After hours of searching, she found a cheap hostel in an old building near the market. The room was tiny, with a narrow bed and a broken fan that made strange noises at night. But it was the only place she could afford. The next day she started looking for work. For 2 days she walked from shop to shop asking if they needed help. Most people said no. Some didn't even look at her. Finally, a small cafe owner agreed to give her a job washing dishes and cleaning tables. The pay was very low, but Ebony accepted it immediately. She didn't have a choice. Every day she woke up before sunrise and walked to the cafe. She worked long hours carrying heavy trays, wiping tables, and washing endless piles of cups and plates. Her hands often became red and sore from the hot water and soap. At night, she returned to her small hostel room completely exhausted. Sometimes she sat quietly on the bed and stared at the wall. Other nights, the pain became too heavy and she cried silently so the other people in the hostel wouldn't hear her. She thought about her mother. She thought about Lunara. She thought about how quickly her own family had believed the lie. But even on the hardest nights, Ebony repeated the same words to herself. One day the truth will come out. She didn't know when it would happen or how. But she held on to that hope like it was the only light left in her life. Days slowly turned into weeks. Her life was full of struggle, long hours, and loneliness. But what Ebony didn't know was that somewhere far away, fate was quietly moving pieces she couldn't see. And very soon, something unexpected was about to arrive in her inbox, something that would change her entire future. One ordinary afternoon in Kashora City, Ebony was sitting in the small staff corner of the cafe during her short break. Her feet were aching after hours of standing, and her hands still smelled like soap from washing dishes all morning. She pulled out her phone, mostly to distract herself for a few minutes before going back to work. As she opened her email, one new message caught her attention. The sender's name made her pause. McCullough and Sons Legal Firm. Ebony frowned. She had never heard of that company before. For a moment she even wondered if it was spam. Slowly, she tapped the email and began to read. The message was short but very formal. It said that a well-known businessman named Elder Kamarin Dlovu had recently passed away. According to his official will, a person named Ebony Masigo had been listed as an important beneficiary. The firm had been trying to locate her, and asked her to contact their office immediately. Ebony stared at the screen in confusion. Beneficiary? She whispered to herself. She had never heard the name Kamarin Dlovu before. She was just a cafe worker struggling to pay for a small hostel room. Why would a wealthy businessman put her name in his will? For a moment she thought it had to be a mistake. But at the bottom of the email was an official phone number, and a request asking her to visit their main office at Zamora Coast as soon as possible. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Her mind kept repeating the same questions again and again. Who was this man? Why did he know her name? 2 days later, after saving enough money for a bus ticket, Ebony traveled to Zamora Coast. The city was beautiful, with blue ocean water and tall modern buildings that made Kashora City look small. When she finally entered the tall glass building of McCullough and Sons, she felt nervous and out of place. A receptionist guided her to a quiet office where a middle-aged lawyer was waiting. The man smiled kindly and asked, "You are Ebony Masigo?" She nodded slowly. He opened a file on his desk and said words that made her heart stop. "Miss Ebony, the late Elder Kamarin Dlovu was your biological grandfather." Ebony blinked in shock. "My grandfather?" she repeated. The lawyer explained that many years ago, family conflicts had separated Kamarin Dlovu from his daughter, Ebony's mother. For decades he had been searching quietly for the granddaughter he had never met. Private investigators had spent years trying to find her. And before he passed away, the lawyer continued gently, he finally discovered who you were. Ebony sat there speechless. After years of feeling unwanted and abandoned, someone she had never even met had been searching for her all along. Ebony was still trying to process the shocking news when the lawyer slowly opened another file on the desk. The papers inside looked thick and official. He looked at her calmly and said, "There is something else you need to know." Ebony felt her heart beating faster. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and continued, "Before Elder Kamarin Dlovu passed away, he made a final decision about his entire estate." Ebony listened quietly, still confused. "He left everything to you." For a moment, Ebony thought she had heard him wrong. Everything? She asked softly. The lawyer nodded. Yes, his entire business empire. Ebony's mind went completely blank. The lawyer gently pushed a document toward her and began explaining. Elder Kamarin Ndlovu had built one of the largest private business groups in the Lumora region. His companies were spread across several cities and coastlines. The file listed everything in detail. There were luxury hotels along the Zamora coast where wealthy tourists stayed every year. There were large mining companies that operated deep in the mountains. There were thousands of acres of farmland producing crops across different regions. And there were beautiful coastal resorts that brought in millions from international visitors. Ebony stared at the pages, her hands slowly beginning to shake. The lawyer then said something that made the moment even more unbelievable. The estimated value of this entire empire is several $100 million. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Just a few weeks ago, Ebony had been standing in the rain outside her mother's house with nowhere to go. She had been working long hours washing dishes in a small cafe just to survive. And now this man was telling her that she owned one of the largest business empires in the region. Ebony looked down at her simple clothes and worn shoes. She still felt like the same girl who struggled to pay for a tiny hostel room. This can't be real, she whispered. The lawyer smiled gently. It is very real, Miss Ebony. He explained that Kamarin Ndlovu had followed her life quietly after finally finding her. He knew she had been treated unfairly and had struggled alone. That was one of the reasons he chose her as the sole heir. He believed you had strength, the lawyer said. And he wanted his legacy to belong to someone who understood hardship. Ebony's eyes slowly filled with tears. For so long she had felt like the most unwanted person in the world. But somewhere, someone had believed in her enough to leave her an entire future. In a single moment, the girl who had been thrown out of her home had become the owner of a powerful empire. In the beginning, everything felt overwhelming for Ebony. The offices were huge, the meetings were serious, and the people around her were experienced business professionals who had worked with Elder Kamarin Ndlovu for years. Sometimes when she sat in the tall glass conference room at the company headquarters, she felt like she didn't belong there at all. Just a few weeks earlier she had been washing dishes in a cafe. Now she was sitting at the head of a table where people discussed million-dollar decisions. At first, many people quietly doubted her. Some advisors looked at her simple background and thought she was just a young girl who had suddenly become rich by luck. They expected her to stay silent and let them control everything. But Ebony had spent her whole life learning how to observe and listen carefully. Instead of pretending to know everything, she started learning step by step. She spent long hours reading company reports. She asked questions during meetings. She visited the hotels, farms, and offices that belonged to the business empire. She talked to workers, managers, and employees. Slowly, she began to understand how everything worked. The advisors from Lenoco Capital Group helped guide her through the process. They explained investments, company strategies, and financial planning. Ebony listened carefully and took notes, determined not to waste the opportunity her grandfather had given her. Then something interesting started happening. When important decisions came up, Ebony began suggesting ideas of her own. Some of them surprised the advisors. Instead of only focusing on luxury projects, Ebony started investing money into struggling communities across the Lumora region. She helped rebuild small farming cooperatives, funded local schools, and created job opportunities in towns that big companies usually ignored. Her reasoning was simple. "I know what it feels like to struggle," she once told her advisors. "If a business grows while people around it suffer, that success means nothing." At first people were unsure about her approach. But soon the results started speaking for themselves. Her projects created thousands of jobs. Local economies began improving. Even the company's reputation grew stronger than ever. Within a year, Ebony's name started appearing in business magazines and news channels across the region. People were fascinated by her story. The girl who had once been thrown out of her home had quietly become one of the most influential young business leaders in the Lumora region. Journalists gave her a nickname that quickly spread across headlines. They called her the quiet heiress who rose from nothing. And for the first time in her life, Ebony wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something powerful. While Ebony was slowly building her new life, something unexpected was happening far away in Nilira town. The truth about Lenara's divorce was finally beginning to surface. After the divorce process started, The court asked Kedrick to submit official documents and evidence about the reasons for ending the marriage. At first, he tried to keep his story the same lie he had told the family months earlier. He kept saying that Ebony had interfered in their marriage. But court investigations are very different from family arguments. Lawyers began checking phone records, messages, and financial transactions. Soon the real story started coming out piece by piece. It turned out that Kedrick had been secretly involved with another woman for almost a year before the divorce. Hotel records showed his name checked in multiple times with the same woman in different cities. Phone records revealed hundreds of late-night calls between them. Even photographs from security cameras began appearing in the investigation files. The evidence was impossible to deny. The court documents clearly stated that the marriage had broken down because of Kedrick's affair and repeated cheating, not because of any interference from anyone else. And the most shocking part? Ebony's name was not mentioned anywhere. Not in the messages, not in the phone records, not in any evidence. She had never contacted Kedrick privately at all. When Lenara's lawyer showed her the full investigation report, she sat there in complete silence. Page after page proved that the story Kedrick had told her was a lie. Her hands began to shake as she read the documents. All those months of anger, all those accusations, all the tears and blame she had thrown at her sister. None of it had been true. The man she had trusted had simply needed someone to take the blame for his betrayal. And the easiest person had been Ebony. For the first time, Lunara remembered the moment in the living room when Ebony had quietly said, "I never even spoke to Kedrick alone." Back then, Lunara hadn't believed her. Now the truth felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. Slowly, a painful realization began to sink in. She hadn't just believed a lie. She had destroyed her own sister's life because of it. Ebony had been thrown out of her home, rejected by her family, and forced to survive alone. All because Lunara had chosen anger instead of truth. Tears rolled down Lunara's face as she closed the court file. But the realization came with a terrible feeling. By the time the truth finally appeared, it was already too late. One quiet morning in Nilira town, everything suddenly changed. The small town cafe near the market had its television on, like it did every day. People were drinking tea and watching the morning news when a breaking headline appeared on the screen. Ebony Masigo, billionaire business heiress, leading one of Lumara's fastest-growing companies. First, no one paid much attention. But then the camera showed the face of the young woman being interviewed. Someone in the cafe leaned closer to the screen. "Wait, isn't that Mama Teresai's daughter?" Within hours, the news spread across the entire town. People started sharing the interview on their phones, talking about it in shops, and whispering about it in the streets. At home, Mama Teresai was sitting in the living room when the same interview appeared on television. She looked up casually at first. Then her body suddenly froze. On the screen, Ebony was sitting in a bright studio, dressed in a simple but elegant suit. She looked calm and confident as reporters asked her questions about her business empire, her investments, and the projects she was building across the Lumora region. The caption below the screen read, "The quiet heiress who rose from nothing, Ebony Masigo." Mama Teresai's hands slowly started shaking. That can't be," she whispered. But it was her. The same daughter she had screamed at. The same girl she had forced out of the house on that rainy night. Mama Teresai remembered the moment clearly. The sound of the door slamming, the rain falling, and Ebony standing outside with only a small bag. And now that same girl was being praised on national television. Reporters were calling her one of the most powerful young business leaders in the region. Mama Teresai felt a painful knot form in her chest. Just then Lunara walked into the room. "What are you watching?" she asked. Mama Teresai didn't answer. She simply pointed at the screen. Lunara looked up. The moment she saw Ebony's face, the color drained from her own. The interview continued playing while Ebony spoke calmly about helping struggling communities and creating opportunities for people who had nothing. Lunara felt her throat tighten. The same sister she had blamed, the same sister she had shouted at, had been innocent the entire time. And now the whole world seemed to admire her. Tears slowly began to fall down Lunara's face. "I did this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I destroyed everything." Mama Teresai couldn't say a single word. For the first time, both of them were forced to face the painful truth. The daughter they had rejected had risen higher than they ever imagined. and the guilt of what they had done was finally catching up with them. A few weeks after the interview went viral, Mama Terasai finally made a decision she had been avoiding. "We have to go see her," she said quietly. Lunara didn't argue. She already knew they couldn't ignore the truth anymore. So one morning they traveled to Lamora City, where Abani's company headquarters stood. The building was called Velmara Tower, one of the tallest and most modern buildings in the entire business district. When they stood outside the glass entrance, both of them felt nervous. People in suits were walking in and out of the building, employees moving quickly with laptops and documents. Mama Terasai looked up at the name on the building and felt her chest tighten. Her daughter owned this place. Inside, a receptionist politely asked who they were there to see. When they said Abani's name, the receptionist made a call, and then guided them to a quiet waiting room on the upper floor. The minutes felt painfully long. Finally, the door opened. Abani walked in. She looked calm and confident, dressed in a simple but elegant suit. But the moment her eyes met her mother and sister, a deep silence filled the room. For a few seconds no one spoke. Then Mama Terasai suddenly stepped forward, tears already falling down her face. "Abani," she whispered. Her voice broke as she tried to speak. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," she said, crying openly now. "I didn't listen to you. I believed lies. I threw my own daughter out of the house." She wiped her tears, but they kept coming. "Please forgive me." Lunara could barely even look at her sister. Her hands were shaking. "I ruined your life," she said quietly. "I blamed you for something you never did. I was angry and hurt, and I needed someone to blame. And I chose you." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Abani. Please forgive me." The room became very quiet. Abani stood there without speaking. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried years of pain and memories. Memories of the rain that night. Memories of standing outside the house with nowhere to go. Memories of crying alone in a tiny hostel room. For a long moment she simply looked at them. Then she finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but every word felt heavy. "When I needed a home, when I needed my family to believe me," she said slowly, "you all pushed me out." She looked directly at them. "The night I stood outside in the rain, that was the moment I realized I had no family left." The words hung in the air. Neither Mama Terasai nor Lunara could say anything. The room fell completely silent. For a long moment no one in the room spoke. The silence felt heavy, like the past was standing there with them. Mama Terasai and Lunara were both crying, waiting for Abani to say something. They knew they had hurt her deeply, and they also knew that nothing they said could erase what had happened. Abani looked at them quietly. The pain of that night in the rain, the lonely days in Kashora City, and the long struggle to rebuild her life all passed through her mind. She took a slow breath. "I won't lie," she said gently. "What happened hurt me more than you can imagine." Mama Terasai lowered her head in shame. "But holding anger forever will only poison my own life," Abani continued. "So yes, I forgive you." Both her mother and Lunara looked up in surprise. But Abani's expression remained calm and serious. "Forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was," she said. She paused for a moment before continuing. "Family is a blessing, but respect is even more important. Without respect, a family cannot survive." Her words were quiet but powerful. Mama Terasai nodded slowly through her tears. She understood that trust would take a long time to rebuild. After that day, Abani returned her focus to the life she had built. Her business empire continued growing across the Lamora region, and her projects began helping more communities than ever before. But there was one place she never forgot: Nilira Town. The same town where she had once walked the streets feeling rejected and unwanted. A year later, Abani announced a new program there. A large scholarship fund for young girls who came from struggling families. The program helped them pay for school, college, and professional training. When reporters asked her why she chose Nilira Town, she simply smiled and said, "Because every girl deserves a chance to build her own future." Soon her story spread even further across the region. News channels, magazines, and social media all talked about the girl whose life had changed so dramatically. The media gave her a powerful title. They called her the girl who was thrown away, but rose to change everything. And maybe the biggest lesson of her story was this: the girl who had once been rejected by her own family became the woman who built her own destiny.